Many producers also don't know what's happening under the soil. They don't know that if you increase 1% of your soil organic matter, 1%, you will hold 20,000 more gallons per acre of water.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic. And we are Unapologetically Outspoken.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Unapologetically Outspoken. Today we have a guest with us, AJ Richards. AJ, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. So we have been so excited waiting for this episode because Tara and I are always talking about all of the crazy shit going on in the world. We've done a lot of episodes on food and just the farmland being bought up by China and Bill Gates and all that kind of stuff. But we haven't really found a good solution yet. And then I came across you on TikTok and you are actually developing a solution to this very real problem that we're all facing, where we're just completely reliant on the grocery store down the street and don't really know how to source our own food or anything like that. So why don't you just start out kind of like introducing what you're doing and how you got into this whole thing?
So what we're doing is creating a solution for the weakness in our food supply chain. And what that looks like is a platform developed to connect local consumers with local producers. And the key is to hyper localize it. The idea is that if the trucks stopped rolling and the store shelves weren't being restocked, you actually had a handshake relationship with the person responsible for the most important thing in your life, which is your food, right? Food, water, food, shelter, safety. Those are our most basic human needs. And we as a society have gotten so comfortable over the last few decades that we don't even know how to source our food. We don't even know how to call our neighbor that's raising it and have an intelligent conversation with them about how to buy from them. So the software is designed to simplify all that, because we do need to meet people where they're at. Consumers are very uncomfortable with making those phone calls just because they've lost the knowledge of how to do that or what to ask for. Nobody likes to look dumb. And so they're afraid to make the call just on the fact that they might look silly. So that's what we're working on, is a solution to connect consumers and producers. And kind of where it got started is 2020, like many other people. I grew up in ag. My family are fifth generation ranchers. I've seen the issues with people not knowing where their food comes from for a long time, but then producers constantly fighting to keep their land or their right to grow food. My family are actually the Bundy ranchers that went head to head with the BLM in 2014. And then in 2016, when Lavoy Finicum was killed. That's my family. So I've been exposed to and observing this complete lack of respect for the people who are growing our food. And so I knew it was an issue. And then 2020 hit. I was selling meat for my family's ranch. I started that at the end of 2019. And then all of the meat packing plants backed up. And I called to schedule my next order of beef. And they said, yeah, we can get you in 18 months. Wow. And I'm like, holy crap, my business is over. Yeah. So I drove all over the state of Utah to every single USDA plant that we could find a spot in, trying to keep the business going. But margins are so small anyway that with the fuel costs and the time on the road and all of that, it didn't make any sense. And there was no light at the end of the tunnel. Like if it was like a month of having to deal with that, fine, no big deal.
Right.
But 2 weeks turned into 2 years. So the light at the end of the tunnel wasn't there. So I had to step back, reevaluate, figure out what was really going on. But also during that time, I heard on the radio people talking about no meat on the store shelves. And you see on the news the pictures of the empty store shelves in major cities especially. And I just happened to be driving through the country and there's cows everywhere. So the food wasn't having food or access to food is not the problem. The problem is we have centralized our food supply chain, given 4 major corporations, at least on the beef side, all of this power. And so by that nature, when one of their systems breaks, it breaks for everybody. And so that's where this idea came from.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because I mean, 2020, I think that was a wake up call for consumers too, because
Yep.
it's like you go to the grocery store and there was nothing there. And I remember in my neighborhood, we live just right outside of Tampa. And same thing, people were all posting on our like neighborhood Facebook group, went to this store, no meat, went to this store, and like no one could find meat, but
Jeez.
we had cows on our
Mhm.
corner. And we were
Yep.
like, what the, where is this going? And no one understood it, but no one wants to admit that, like you said. But I
Mhm.
remember my husband and I, we were like, our generation is so screwed because we can't do anything for ourselves. We're so reliant on, this complex supply chain that's just falling apart because of
Mhm.
COVID. So I think that woke up a lot of people to start looking for what you're offering.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely made a difference. And we can see a trend where a lot of producers are now finding ways to go direct. They're learning how to do the marketing. They're learning how to handle fulfillment. They're learning how to, and it's usually their kids, right? You got the older generation, the average producers in their 60s. Some of the statistics that's really frightening, especially as a father. Um, we've lost 40% of our small farms and ranches since 2000. The average so less than 1% of our population are producers that know how to raise our food, and the average age is 60. So we're at this.
Why have we lost them?
So in 1981, President Reagan made a change to the rules that kept big corporations from merging. Like it was, might forget the term here, antitrust laws.
Okay.
So they changed those laws and they said as long as it doesn't affect the consumer and they have to end up paying more, like all they were focused on was the cost of the goods to the consumer. And so when that law was changed in 81, we see this slow development over the last few since then, where this corporation gets bought out by this one, then this one gets bought out by this one, and they just get bigger and bigger. And so that's why we're now in a situation where 4 major corporations have control of 85% of our meat supply chain.
And
Because
who
the
are those? Who are those?
yeah, good question. Cargill, JBS, National Beef, and Tyson Foods. And JBS is the largest in the world, and they're a Brazilian-owned company. And Tyson Foods is a Chinese-owned company. So 2 of our 4 major corporations are not even American-controlled. And I would even say the 2 that are American-controlled, they almost work autonomously, where their only purpose is higher profit for shareholders. So there's no decision making being done on a conscious level. It's just the number. How do I get the number bigger? How do I get the number bigger? And so when these decisions get made, they're not thinking about the consumer ever. They're thinking about the profit, the bottom line, which is also why you could probably not be surprised that many of those companies are also vested in fake meat and fake
Yes.
food. The
Mm.
same ones that we think have our best interest in mind for the meat, which only people that think that they just make, probably live in the city, they have no idea. They're not. They're hedging their bets, so they're now investing in fake products as well. Plus, that's, in my opinion, when you talk about unapologetically outspoken, it's food IP. That's where this is headed. Food intellectual property, because if they can own the IP for what's required to be eaten and vilify everything else because of climate change, then your only source of food is through them. You can't even grow your own or raise your own. Now they have all the money in the world they could ever want because you can only buy their products. So I do believe there's some intention behind that. There's probably some evil people at the top, like Klaus Schwab, that are pushing that. And I'm not saying it's him. I don't think he's that directly connected with the food supply, but I'm sure there's connections there somewhere. So I believe there are people at the top like that, but I think for the most part, it's just completely driven by numbers. How do we get more?
Well, this is scary too, because you say like 2 of the biggest companies are from China and BRICS. And like we've been doing all these episodes on our Brazil and China. We've been doing all these episodes on the BRICS currency. And it's just like that seems very unstable to rely on stuff from those countries, which I know we do for just about everything. But the other issue is climate change, like look at
Mhm.
what they did to the Dutch farmers, where in
Mhm.
the name of climate change, they like stole their land. So do you foresee something like that happening here? Is it already happening? And then if these farmers, if the average age is 60, like are their kids going to continue on the business, or are they going to say, screw it, this is too big of a fight and we don't want to deal with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it's happening. That's what my family were fighting years ago before COVID happened. So they just looked like a bunch of crazy Waco cowboys, right? And militiamen. That's how it was painted, because it was unfathomable that we would live in a world that we're currently living in. You know,
Yeah.
2014 was so far away from what the events of 2020 happened that the news did a really good job making them look like they were a bunch of crazy cowboys, but they were the early warning system saying these things are being corrupted to take away land that we rely on to raise our food. And that's a whole, that situation with them is a whole podcast in and of itself. And I'm not the right guy for it, but that's what they were doing back then, is trying to say, here's what's coming. We're being vilified. You have these special interest groups like the Western Watershed that is absolutely corrupt. And it's a nonprofit run by a bunch of psychopaths that think that we shouldn't have any ruminating or grazing animals anywhere. And so what ends up happening is you have the groups like this that are very well funded by bigger groups like WEF. And I don't know that that's where they get any of their funding, but that's what it looks like. Then they use that to sue the government, like the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM before the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And the BLM now has to fight that. And that's why all of a sudden water rights get taken away, or grazing permits get shrunken, or all of these things, because you've got this special interest group saying, oh, we need to protect these sage grouse. Like, that's the most important thing. So you can't have cattle here, or you have too many cattle. So now we're going to cut your herd in half on the ground that you're leasing, because we got to protect the sage grouse. Now, I'm all for conservation and protecting all species. That's where regenerative agriculture comes in. But when you have these special interest groups, that's a front for what their real purposes are. They don't give a shit about those things. They're just wanting control, and that's how they throw their weight around, is through money and lobbying and legal paperwork, lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
So I know back in 2021, and maybe even beforehand, Biden was like paying farmers not to farm.
Yeah.
Was your family impacted by that, or do you know people who were involved in any of that?
No, that's so my personal connections are more around cattle. And so I've not heard that happening in the cattle space. I think that's typically in the farming space, and that's not uncommon. A lot of times they'll try to do it under the guise of conservation. Like, you should let this section rewild, let it just do its own thing. But then you get into the research of holistic management and regenerative agriculture, and you find out that the last thing you should do is let a piece of ground go ungrazed, because you need the rumen of the gut of a ruminating animal to feed the soil biology of the ground that they're on. And naturally, before we colonized the United States, the bison did that naturally when there was 30 million of them roaming around. And so it did it on its own through natural cycles. Well, we killed all the bison, we put up fences everywhere and got rid of all the predators. So now we don't have this natural movement to refertilize our soils through nature. So we have to have ruminating animals managed properly by agriculture, professionals like ranchers and farmers, to keep the dust bowls from coming back, to keep desertification from happening. When we talk about climate change, I believe in desertification because it's measurable. It's very plain to see. A lot of the other stuff is just being leveraged for fear. And most of it's bullshit. Because
it's total bullshit. And like you said, it's a power grab. But I think there's so many people that are just lazy, to be honest, and don't want to do their own research and just go along with it. Like, oh yeah, CO2 is going to kill us all. And, but don't really look at any of the facts. But you're absolutely right. I was listening to someone who, they were on a podcast with someone else that was vegan, and they were making the point. They were like, even vegans have to admit that we need animals for the soil, or you can't grow all the stuff that you want to grow. The soil will be depleted. So, I mean, it's a great point, but I don't think a lot of people realize that.
No, I think we do live in a world where the majority of our voters live in cities, and they're so preoccupied with their own lives. And I'm not saying this is everyone, but if the shoe fits. And so the entirety of their information is a headline.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yes. And I was going to ask you, I was going to ask you about that because I grew up in Los Angeles. None of this ever occurred to me when I was growing up. You really didn't even think about where your food came from. You just went to the grocery store and you got what you needed.
Yep.
And for the last couple years, I've been living in a very rural area of Texas, and I am surrounded by farmers and ranchers, and it's either cows or goats or sheep, or, I mean, my whole area is just rural, and I'm seeing a completely different side of things now. And the more research we've been doing, the more I discover, like, holy shit, there's like some really impactful things that are going on. And so I was going to ask, do you feel that you're reaching people who live in the cities and that they seem to care about what's going on or not?
I believe so. I mean, in the last 6 months, I've gone from 2,500 followers to about 82,000. That's just people sharing the message that this software is coming. So I'm sure there are people in the cities that are on there, but my audience, I've been very clear. I'm talking to the patriots, the people that still believe America has something to offer, and we just have to fight for it again. And so there are going to be people in that group that live in the cities, but by and large, I don't know. I think that just like anything, people are creatures of habit and comfort. And so they're not going to really pay attention until it gets really uncomfortable again. My hope is that there's enough patriots to help this movement so that at least it's there for when that uncomfortableness happens, because frankly, security issues happen when people are without.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so, you saw people fighting over toilet paper because they were without, right? That doesn't mean there wasn't a bunch of the other population. It's like, I just bought a bidet. I'm not fighting. Right. So in comparison, it's like, well, I know my ranchers, so I'm not fighting, but there's still all this fighting going on around me because they didn't know how to be prepared, And so that's where the security issue comes in. I've always said, like, if I'm prepared and my neighbors aren't, then I am not prepared.
Right.
That's such a good point.
So
I feel like on our TikTok, I've been seeing, especially lately, so many people will comment and they're like, yes, like, we get it, but what do we do? We're ready. Yeah. We're ready. What do you need us to do? And everyone's asking that, like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So what do we do? Like, what are you doing? And how can all these patriots come together and like help bring this thing forward?
Yeah. Buy from your people that are growing it. There's the saying, vote with your dollar. And I think that really is underestimated, but that's the truth. Voting with your dollar. Like, all of the movements being done on the other side to harm us are being done for the dollar, for your dollar. So if you're listening to this and you want to know what you can do, don't go to the grocery store. Unless your grocery store is a store that's supporting and advertising that they're buying local meat and local eggs and local milk, don't go there. If it's a chain grocery store, they're sourcing this from the people that are slowly taking our choices away for food. So don't buy from them. If you can shake the farmers and ranchers' hand, that's always the best. See, my ultimate vision is, like, there's so many different problems going on in our world right now that any one thing could cause a major disruption. Let's say I get this software up and running and it's running very well, and then something else happens to where you can't access it. I don't know what that would look like, but let's say you can't access it. Well, if you had time to get to know them, you don't need the software. The software is a convenience tool. Like, frankly, if I could just tell everybody where to go and they would do it on their own and it would just fix it, I wouldn't spend the time and energy and money to build a software.
Yeah.
But the people in the city are used to convenience and simplicity. And the more people I can get on board with getting local, then the more we create support. The Patriots are already, like, I have a Discord group where we've got probably over 2,000 people in there now. These are patriots that are like, you just get me a phone number and I'll do the legwork. I don't need all the fancy bells and whistles. Great. That's our foundation. Those are the people who get it. That's what's happening in Discord. But the rest of the population, they're so conditioned for convenience that to make the phone call, to have a conversation about the meat, to know what kind of cuts they can order, to then coordinate delivery and pickup. Like, the majority of people are not going to be willing to do that because it's not bad enough yet. Now, I promise you, you go 3 days without food and your entire psyche changes. Like, you could be this person on this side, that would be like, I would never do that. And in 3 days of being hungry, you're like, whatever it freaking takes, right? So we have the people that are already doing it on their own, and then we're building this software so that's literally like Amazon. You click, you buy, and then you get to choose, because I'm still going to educate and advocate, get to know your producer. So if they have an option to meet them for pickup, you should say, I'll meet you for pickup, because that's FaceTime with the person growing the most important thing you need as a human being, which is sustenance, right? And so, there's a delivery option. We're going to plug in certain APIs that allow things like maybe Uber Eats or DoorDash to deliver for the producers. But man, if you can get FaceTime with your farmer and rancher, and then beyond the food security side, you're also going to know what kind of people they are. I love our farmers and ranchers, but they're a group of people like any other. Doesn't mean there aren't some bad apples in there that aren't trying to take some shortcuts. So when you get to know your farmer and rancher, you can ask them questions and get to know how they're raising the product. What do you ask them directly? Are you giving your livestock antibiotics if that's something you're concerned about? Are you giving your livestock hormones? Vaccines are very, very common in the ag space. It's very rare to find anybody not doing a vaccine at birth or at the first branding, just to keep that calf healthy. It's basically one shot and then that's it. So I don't know the full impact of that one shot all the way down the chain, right? We're just now learning that all the shots I got as a kid for school was a lot of bullshit. Like, my ADD that my mom says, well, that was never a problem when I was a kid, you're just making it up, was from probably the vaccines she gave me, and she didn't know any better.
The ADD and autism and all kinds of things. They're starting to realize, maybe a lot of that came from environmental factors. Right.
So you're most likely not going to find an animal that hasn't had at least one vaccine. That's a common thing. But I will say they are not mRNA vaccines. That's new. That's a new conversation. I know it's real. It's 100% legitimate concern. But if you're buying from your local producers, as of right now, not a single one of them have anything to do with that.
That's huge, because I wish I had the source with me, but I had heard there was a news article or video or something, and it was saying they were testing meat like at different stores and finding mRNA. And then there's people that didn't get vaccinated that are like, wait, now do I have this in my body? So there's really no way of knowing unless you go to someone that is a local producer.
Right. And if you go to the grocery store, they're buying their meat from big suppliers, which is the big four, which they're in the back pocket. They're all in cahoots with the corrupt government that we have. And so if the government says, I want you to put mRNA vaccines in your livestock in the feedlots, the big four don't give a shit. They're like, okay, we'll do that. Nobody's going to put up a fight when it comes to the big packers. They're not going to do that because they're all working together. The lobbyists and the politicians, they're just all circling the same, disgusting drain. And so, but when you buy it from a local, and that's another reason they're trying to take all these locals out. Like you mentioned, the Dutch farmers in Ireland, they're going to kill 200,000 of their herd because of climate change. It's so stupid. So you got these guys that want to dictate everything. I call it corporate government. That's really what we have. We don't have a independent government. We have a corporate government driven 100% by corporations that are funding everything. We all know now, it's no surprise that a politician gets elected and they, that's supposed to be a 6-figure job and they leave millionaires. How? Where'd it come from? Where'd it come from? It came from corporations paying them to make decisions on their behalf. Right. So that's what it looks like. You meet that producer face to face, but then you can have less serious conversations. Are you giving it corn and grain? Okay. And if it matters to you, where does that corn and grain come from? Are you raising, because there are producers that have their own lots raising their own corn and grain to fatten their cows. I'm a huge proponent an advocate for regenerative agriculture, massive, because I think long term that's sustainability when you can raise. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you explain a little bit about what that is for some
Yeah.
of the listeners who may not understand it?
Yeah. So just real quick. So I'm a huge supporter of regenerative agriculture, but I do not vilify corn and grain finished beef, because the reality is there's some really amazing families out there that's what they know. They know, I'm going to have a cow calf, I'm going to raise it to a certain age, and I'm going to put it in our own feedlot and fatten it for the market, because frankly, they can get that cow to the market faster.
Mhm.
You can get an 18-month-old cow fat and ready to be eaten on corn and grain versus a corn and grain, a regenerative or grass-fed and finished, takes 24 to 30 months because it's growing naturally with that natural energy from the plant. So what regenerative agriculture is it's, I'll simplify it. It's taking a look at how nature used to work in its own, as its own whole system prior to us interfering, and then mimicking what that looked like. So like I said, the bison used to roam through the West, like between Yellowstone National Park and the Bighorn Mountains. They used to have something like 6 million bison roam through there constantly, right? Every year they would come through. Well, those bison were always clumped together and always on the move because they had predator push, right? They had wolves and bears keeping them bunched together and always moving. So what happened was, you had this major heavy impact on the soil. You had lots of manure and urine and saliva from them biting the grasses, putting all of that microbiology into the soil, and they didn't stay forever. They were just moving. So now you've got this major fertilization. The actual hooves basically palpated the ground, and the mycelia network, the fungal network under the soil, responded to that, and it triggered growth once they moved away. So that's why we had super tall grasses throughout our whole country, like a savanna, just a lush savanna, because of that constant movement. So regenerative agriculture now says, okay, we need to mimic predator push and predator consolidation, and then constantly rotate. So people that do regenerative agriculture, they'll put their cattle or their sheep or their goats or whatever in close proximity with one another, and then they'll feed them for a day in this spot, and they drop an electric fence and they move to the next spot, and then they eat that, so they stay close. So that fence is the predator keeping them close together, and it's also the predator when they drop it, because then they move. So they don't have time to overeat or desertify one particular area. Desertification happens from the lack of ruminating animals, not done through regenerative or holistic management. So the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, they have what they implement called AUMs. It's basically how many animals you're allowed to feed on an acre of land per month. So my family, for example, might have 200,000 acres of leased land, like they have the rights to graze on it. But somebody in the Bureau of Land Management, because of very old, outdated, crappy science, says, well, you've got this many cows and there's this many estimated wildlife, deer, elk, whatever other things eat the grasses. You can only have one cow per 100 acres. Wow. So if manure is the only thing that's going to break down and contribute to the soil biology, and you have one cow per 100 acres, it's like finding a needle in a stack of needles.
Yeah.
So that's why we're desertifying. We should have far more cattle on these areas that are starting to turn to deserts. Like I'm from the state of Utah, and the state of Utah is burning up at a rapid pace. Like I'm actually down here right now. So I come down from Cody. There's lots of rain up in Cody this last season. It was nice. Cody's not exempt from this desertification issue. They still have lots of BLM land that's not getting the proper amount of grazing. But state of Utah is burning up, and you can see it's just a complete lack of regenerative animals. Or of livestock. I actually own a small piece of land in a desert called the Escalante Desert in southern Utah. It's only 60 acres, but I bought it to experiment with regenerative agriculture. It's a 3,000 square mile desert. They call it the Escalante Desert. 2 years ago, they had enough rain to knock over a train. Like it came off the watershed and knocked it over, and yet it's a desert. The reality is there's not enough ruminating animals to create grass. Grass is what sucks that water down into the ground and then contributes back to our aquifers. So all of this, the drought and the water shortages that are happening for like California, I don't know where you're at now, but there's this huge fight over the Colorado watershed.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yep. The Colorado River watershed. Well, the whole Colorado River watershed is a desert all the way down. And they're coming up with all these stupid ideas, but if they actually implemented the rollout of millions of herbivores, of ruminating animals, and they properly managed them along that, you would capture every bit of rain when it came in. You would also create more rain because there's this process called evapotranspiration. You ever walk somewhere where it's hot and then you go past a patch of grass and you're like, oh, it's much cooler right here.
Yeah.
Even if the sprinklers aren't on, you're just like, man, it's way cooler here than it is over there. That's because the leaves are putting off moisture. It's called evapotranspiration. So it's creating its own local water cycle, which is what we need. So we get a big portion of our rain coming off of the ocean, and then the rest of it's supposed to come from its own cycle in that area. Well, when it's all dry or worst case, worse, we overbuild our cities. So now we have asphalt and roof tiles. And I mean, it's just hot. And that's the other problem with rain cycles coming off the ocean. What lines every one of our beautiful beaches? Major cities.
Yeah.
Because that's where everybody wants to live. So now you have this huge heat wall coming off there. And so here comes these storm cells over the ocean that used to be unimpeded to roll over like California is a drought. Why? It's right next to the ocean. You should have all the moisture you could. You go up higher north where there's less cities and you do have more humidity and moisture. That air, that moisture comes off the ocean, hits that wall of heat, and it kicks it back out into the ocean until it gets big enough where it comes in with a vengeance and it can't be stopped. And then you get major flooding and all kinds of other issues from that. So anyway, it's a big topic, but that's
its own podcast topic. That's fascinating to me. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like they need someone like you in government or working with the government, because I don't think any of them know, like, it doesn't seem like anyone understands what a huge problem this is causing. Or do they just understand and they just don't care because they just see dollar signs?
I think yes, there are people in it. So there's a fantastic documentary that came out on Netflix called Kiss the Ground in 2020. It's a big part of why I'm doing this. Because at first I was like, we're screwed. Nothing we can do. That's it. It's over. Desertification is like, that was my internal dialogue. And I was like, Mike, I'm going to watch my kids go hungry. Yeah. Kiss the Ground has been lobbying for changes in the farm bill that's coming out. They've been working very diligently.
Yes. So I was going to ask you about that, because the farm bill, it comes up every 5 years for renewal, and it is supposed to be reauthorized this September. Yep. And from what I understand, like, the components of this bill kind of determine like how our agricultural and food programs are run and how everything's funded in the US. And I haven't heard much about it other than, they want to increase funding for SNAP and social welfare programs. But how is that actually impacting what you guys are doing?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not sure on the farm bill side, but there are two other bills that are being passed through that are just as significant, or they're trying to be passed through. Senator Thomas Massey, I think he's in Alabama. Ton of respect for that guy, just in every aspect of what he's participating in the government. I think he's one of the few common sense people that are there. And he's a producer as well, a farmer as well. And it's called the Prime Act. The Prime Act is being set up to be able to allow state inspected meat processors to sell. Like if you have a cow, you take it to a state inspected facility and get it processed, you can sell the meat. Okay. As of right now, state inspected is not authorized to sell prepackaged meat. I have to buy the cow from you first. So it's got my name on it, and then I can actually do it myself if I wanted, or I could have you slaughter it for me if I wanted. But a state inspected facility is now okay. Well, the Prime Act is set up to say, look, it's the state's facility. They can decide. If my state says, yes, It's our facility. We manage it. So yeah, you can sell it after the fact. That would be huge because that would open up a lot. Remember what I told you when my business, 18 months to get slaughter? That's because I was selling meat online. I had to have that USDA bug on the package. If I was if I was authorized to sell prepackaged meat out of a state inspected, I could have sold as much as I wanted in the state, which would have opened up more facilities for me to be able to use for processing. So I could have fed and been available for more people. It's harder to sell an animal before it's processed because I have to sell it to you in a quarter, half, or a whole. And I tried to do that in COVID, and guess what else went out of stock? Deep freezers. You could not find a deep freezer anywhere in the nation when COVID hit. Why? Because everybody's like, oh shit, we better stock up on our food.
Right.
So Kiss the Ground's working diligently on the farm bill, which is kind of I'll just say what I am aware of. It's more like an umbrella over all of ag, whereas these other bills are more directly, they're more targeted. So to answer your question, yes, there are people in the government trying to make this happen. Now, if they don't listen, then that's the clear sign that it is about the money.
Yeah.
Because they're now aware. They now know they've had experts in front of them. Gabe Brown in North Dakota wrote a book called oh shoot, I forgot it, but I'll think of it here. But he's on Kiss the Ground. That's when I first saw that. He's a farmer in North Dakota. They own a company called Understanding Ag, where they teach farmers and ranchers how to go to regenerative agriculture. Frankly, they're just teaching people how to go back to what their great grandparents did.
Mm-hmm.
We're only a few generations away from that. But dad didn't do it that way, so I don't know any other way. His dad first started teaching because after World War II, fertilizers came into effect and all of these other different changes in our ag, the way we raise our food changed. And so all of that changed at that time as well. So they're out there. They know it. There's a lot of push for it. There's actually part 2 is coming out for Kiss the Ground. It's called Common Ground in November. And so it'll be really great. Because when Kiss the Ground came out in 2020, they had filmed that 7 years prior, and it just never got picked up until 2020. And so when I talked to Gabe and these other guys about it, they're like, we forgot about it. We just kept doing what we were doing anyway. It didn't affect, we didn't do this to do a documentary. The documentary found us because we were doing it. And so they're doing the follow-up to show how much ground they have regenerated in 10 years.
Oh,
and
wow. That'll be powerful.
Yes, I'm very excited. Now I have a warning when you watch Kiss the Ground. Gavin Newsom's in there. Ignore that entire section.
I ignore him anyways.
I know. I even told the guys when I was like, man, I loved it. But you sure could have done without Newsom in there. And they kind of like, yeah, we know.
Whoops.
So, yep. So, and it was done again 7 years prior to 2020. So I don't even know what the politics were like with that guy, but
he's the one trying to ruin California.
Yeah. Well, he succeeded. So,
Yeah.
So there's people out there talking about, they know it exists. Regenerative agriculture is phenomenal, but kind of back to where that came up. I will never vilify a producer who's doing corn and grain, because I know a lot of consumers who prefer corn and grain finished beef. Now, I think if they understood the health impacts of that, they might change their mind, because that's a whole nother topic. But at the end of the day, if you're sourcing it from the person that you shook their hand, you have a stable food supply. You know that you can count on it. So I always say, if you know your farmers and ranchers, you'll always have food. So get to know them by name. It should be we've forgotten how to do a lot of things, but the most simple thing a person can do is start Googling local producers and at least get to know them. You don't have to learn all the other stuff, just get to know them.
And I think that's something we don't think about. It's like everyone's hearing about this lab grown meat and stuff. So I think now people start to think about it, but you can just go on Google and look it up. Like this can be done. It's not that difficult, Sorry, Tara, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, I've had a couple people approach me and ask if I knew any ranchers that did share cows. Do you get a lot of interest in that?
Yeah, cow sharing is very common. That's where you can, when you do a cow share program, that's where you know that you can participate in a whole animal with a few people, and then you can go to a state inspected facility. You're not limited by processing, because now, let's say I own a cow and you two go in on a half cow each. When I get that brand inspection done, it'll have your guys' name on it. It's your animal. And and what we would do is I would say, okay, great, I've sold it. Where would you like me to take it? I typically use these guys, and you're going to say, I don't know anybody, so take it there, right? That's really how it's going to go. We trust you. Where are you going to take it? And then I'll take it to the processor. I would go over what we call a cut sheet with you. How do you want your animal cut when it's getting to the cut and wrap side? I'd go over that with you as your producer and answer the questions you have. Like, I've had people say, I want all ribeyes. I'm like, well, you show me the cow that produces all ribeyes and I want that breed. People don't know that you're only going to get, 12 ribeyes per half beef and 12 New Yorks per. They don't know that. This is information that's completely lost. And I've even met producers that don't know that. If they're a cow calf producer, their whole job, cow calf means I have mama cows. Once they have calves, I sell them at auction when they're about 6 months to a year old. That's a cow calf operation. Why would I need to know how it's cut? If my entire life was around selling calves, why would I know how to part that animal out? But I've also learned that if many producers also don't know what's happening under the soil. They don't know that if you increase 1% of your soil organic matter, 1%, you will hold 20,000 more gallons per acre of water.
Wow.
That's huge. So if you're in a desert and you didn't know that, like I have a friend, Alejandro Carrillo, his ranch is in the Chihuahua Desert. And when you see his images side by side with just the ranch right next door, it's like a whole different planet. Like he's got lush green grass everywhere. They only get 6 inches. They're in the Chihuahua Desert. They get 6 inches of rain a year, but because of the way he manages his livestock and because he knows what the soil, how the soil works, how the climate works, all of those things, he's doing things that are incredible. And it's cool to see that a lot of producers are starting to move that route. And so, yeah, it's pretty interesting.
That is cool. I didn't even know there was such a thing as cow sharing, but I'm interested now. So
Yeah.
I just learned something new. And I'm sure a lot of people listening too are going to be like, yeah, I want to do that.
So cow shares make it much easier to source locally and have less limitations. I have a website called stayclassymeats.com. And what we do is we work with ranchers who are too busy ranching to sell direct. So they needed somebody to help them get their product out. Like my friend RC Carter is, he actually owns CarterCountryMeats.com. He's letting that go, and we're taking it over because his ranch is growing so well because of his regenerative practices that he's like, AJ, I'm up at 4 a.m. and I go to bed at 9. I don't want to go home and get on customer service emails and figure out shipping and handling and all. Like, help me. So we take Wyoming and Montana beef and we ship it across the country, at least until we get all of this other stuff, all these other hubs situated. But what we're doing with him is a whole animal program. So you buy the whole animal and then we send it to you monthly in 30-pound increments. So you don't have to have a deep freeze. Or if you live in the city and you don't have space for a deep freeze, you can plan on 30 pounds coming to you monthly so that you're not overwhelmed with a whole animal at one time or a half an animal at one time. So it's essentially a cow share program that we hold the inventory.
That is really cool. Yeah. And I feel like we are on such a verge of like a tipping point almost, right? So it's like if things keep going on the way they had been going, your whole industry, could be bought up in another generation. Like who knows? But what gives me hope is looking at what happened with, Target and Bud Light and Disney. Yep. And it's like people are waking up more and more every single day. And I think if people just become aware of these things that you're talking about, which is a great, like, look at how much you've blown up on TikTok and going on podcasts and stuff. I think people will start voting with their dollar and we will see a shift. So it gives me a lot of hope because honestly, before we did this podcast, I was kind of like, we're fucked. Like, you know what I mean? But this, like knowing that these things already exist, we just have to like make people aware of it is pretty cool. And I think it could really change our future if we just get the word out, All right, everyone, stay tuned for part 2 with AJ Richards that's coming out on Wednesday, where we start diving into some of the more controversial topics around farmland, Bill Gates, the WEF, and more. We'll see you back here Wednesday. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.